Father in heaven, thank you for the Scriptures. Thank you for your gift of the Holy Spirit that helps us to interpret them. And thank you for revealing Jesus Christ to us in all of His majesty. We ask as we begin to study these things in the book of Revelation that you guide our thoughts. For we pray in His majestic name. Amen. Okay, let's today consider the author of Revelation, the date at which it was written, the audience, and the approaches that are made to the book. A lot of this we've anticipated, at least if you've been here, you pretty much know my answer to all these questions, but we need to lay it out and explain to you why I'm taking a preterist approach to the book and what that means in case you don't know what preterism is. So the first verse of the Revelation says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave Him to show to His bondservants, the things which must shortly take place, and He sent and signified it." That means He communicated it in symbols. This book is all written in symbols, and that's important. He sent and symbolized it by His angel to His bondservant John. Now, there's actually 5 steps in this communication process. God, the Father, gives this to Jesus Christ, who gives it to angels, who give it to John, who writes it for us. Got that? The Father gives it to the Son, who gives it to angels, who give it to John, who give it to us. So these angels are in this book revealing stuff to John, and that's rather interesting because angels as revealers are primarily associated with the Old Testament, and the New Testament revelation comes through men. And the fact that angels are involved in this revelation process is important, I think, because the book is showing us the end of the old creation, the end of the first creation. Angels were given as guardians for humanity in our childhood. Galatians says that with the coming of the new covenant, our childhood is over and we're supposed to come into a more mature relationship with God as humanity is growing to become the bride of Christ. Also, we find in Genesis chapter 3 that when Adam failed to guard the garden, he was kicked out and cherubim were put there to guard it. And they are the ones who had the keys of the kingdom, the flaming sword. Jesus comes and He gives the keys of the kingdom, the flaming sword, back to us. Angels no longer maintain the flaming sword, we do. And what's the sign that the flaming sword is given to us? When did that happen? Describe it. Pentecost, right. Tongues of fire, flaming swords distributed to the church. And those are the keys of the kingdom, and the church, therefore, maintains the kingdom. So, we would ask a question, why is it that this comes through an angel here? Why doesn't it come straight from Jesus to John like the rest of the New Testament does? And I think that the reason is this book deals with the end of, the completion of, the old creation, which extends up to AD 70. We have an overlap. The new creation comes in AD 30. We have a wilderness period. The old creation ends in AD 70. And, of course, we'll be looking at that in considerable detail as we go. But that overlap period where Ishmael and Isaac are in the house together and the son of the bondwoman has not yet been cast out, as Paul says in Galatians, that overlap period is what this book is going to be dealing with. So that's what we'll be discussing today anyway, why I would say this book is dealing with that and not with something else. Who is the author then? The author, at least who penned this the first time, is John. It was always understood that this is the same John who wrote the Gospels, the John who was an apostle, the John who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. That's never been questioned until around the 3rd century when one of the early church theologians made a linguistic comparison of Revelation and John's Gospel and said, these don't read the same. There's different vocabulary, there's a different style, and so it's probably a different author. And he suggested that a man named John the Presbyter, or John the Elder, the word presbyter means elder. It also means priest. Priest is just a contraction of the word presbyter. So John the Priest, or John the Presbyter, or John the Elder wrote this, and he was one of the figures in the early church. And they said, well, it wasn't the Apostle John, it was the prophet John who wrote it. Well, how would you answer that? Well, the answer to it is fairly simple. John didn't write the book of Revelation in the sense of composing it, any more than Moses wrote Leviticus. Leviticus was dictated to Moses. There's probably not 10 verses in Leviticus that Moses himself wrote. He copied it down. But if you look at it, the Lord said to Moses, and then there's, 2 paragraphs. Moses just writes down. So the style of the book of Leviticus is Yahweh's style. It's not Moses' style. The only section of Leviticus that's not dictated to Moses is the story about the son of the Egyptian woman who curses God. That's the only story in Leviticus. The rest of it is all dictation. So you would say, this doesn't have Moses' style, it has Yahweh's style. Moses just wrote it down. Similarly, the book of Revelation was not composed by John. John didn't sit down and write this book. It was all shown to him. It was basically dictated to him. And so the fact that this book has a different style from John's gospel is completely understandable. John composed the Gospel of John. John composed 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And when you read them, it's obvious the same mind composed those books. They're written in the same kind of overlapping style where there are constant double references going on. You read John's Gospel, you're constantly with double references in this kind of overlapping style where he's progressing through ideas. And the epistles of John are the same way. Well, Revelation isn't that way, but then John didn't write Revelation. He just wrote it down. It's the angels who were showing him this and showing him that and telling him this and telling him that. He hears something and he writes it. You see the point? It's not in John's style because John is not really the author of it. It was shown to him, he wrote it down. So we don't need to worry about stylistic differences. And once you see that, you say, why on earth would this be anybody but John? It's kind of like the book of Hebrews. We're not told who wrote Hebrews, but it's in the style of Paul, and when you stop to think about it, than any other candidate around. People say, well, Apollos wrote it. Well, how would you know that? We don't have anything from Apollos to compare it with. Or they say, Priscilla wrote it. Let's get one woman in there anyway. Well, we don't have anything else from Priscilla to compare it with. Obviously, God doesn't want us to link it with the rest of Paul's writings, even if Paul did write it. So we're not told exactly who wrote it, but when push comes to shove, if you're going to make a guess, the only reasonable guess is Paul. Everything else is just shooting in the dark. And there are plenty of Pauline stylistic turns in Hebrews that would point to him. Well, here you get down to this and say, this was given to John. Who else is it going to be? In the New Testament, there's just really one John. So throwing up other names and some other John is just completely shooting in the dark. There's no reason to even entertain it. So we're just going to go with the assumption that this is John the Apostle. Occasionally somebody says it's John the Baptist. And the reason for that is that there is a very small school of thought that sees the book of Revelation as basically a summary of the Old Testament. We're not going to be doing much of anything with that. I don't think that works at all, but there have been those who have taken that approach. Said that these symbols really point to the Old Testament and the coming of Jesus. And all of these things about the destruction of the city and the beast and all that are focusing on the cross. I just point that out to you. That there have been those who've taken it that way, but that really doesn't work, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time arguing against that position. We're just going to set it aside and not worry about it. It hasn't commanded much of a following. What's the date of this book? That's the real question. If we're going to say this has to do with the destruction of Jerusalem, if we're going to say the beast is Nero, then this book has to be written in the 60s, or maybe the late 50s. Most of your Bibles, if you have a footnote Bible or a Bible with introductions, are going to tell you it's written in the 90s, around 1895. And that Domitian was on the throne, and that John was getting to be around 100 years old, and he wrote this book. And he was exiled on the island of Patmos. Well, for one thing, we don't know that he was exiled on the island of Patmos. We know that he was there, and that's it. He may not have been there as a result of an exile. He may just have been there, preaching or something. The early church fathers tell us that he was there in exile, and so he may well have been. But Revelation doesn't tell us that. So we have this question, if the book was written in the 90s, in the reign of Domitian, who did persecute the church, then obviously it doesn't predict the destruction of Jerusalem. If it predicts the destruction of Jerusalem, it has to be written in the late 50s or early 60s. So how can we tell? Well, I think we can tell there is a tremendous amount of literature on this. Some of the church fathers say it's written in the 60s. Some of them say it's written in the 90s. All of the discussion of it is late. We don't have all that much from the early church, you know. People try to figure out what the early church believed about this or that, and we don't have thousands of sermons from churches all over the Roman Empire, decade by decade, so that we know what the pervasive beliefs of the church were. We have the writings of a very small number of apologists, usually men who were converted to Christianity out of a philosophical lifestyle and were not all that familiar with it. So the idea that we have this real clear picture of what the first 2 centuries of the church looked like is a myth. We don't. We don't have anywhere near enough information to go back and make a sociological, historical study of it. And we don't have much discussion of when this book was written or who wrote it or anything from very early. So they're not much help. What does the book itself say, and why is it that I'm convinced that it's written before the destruction of Jerusalem and concerns that event? Well, it's because the Revelation states that the events that are about to happen, that are being symbolized in this book, are just about to happen, that the time is near. It does not say this is going to happen eventually. It doesn't say it's going to happen after a long time. Let me quote to you from Matthew 24 how the Bible speaks. Jesus says, Matthew 23:36, "Truly I say these things will come on this generation." And in Matthew 24, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." Then he goes on and he gives these parables that do this. "My master is not coming for a long time, while the bridegroom was delaying. Now after a long time the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them." You see, there's a distinction, at least in language, between this is going to happen soon, this generation, right now, and this is going to happen a long time off. Well, what does Revelation say? Does it say it's going to happen a long time off, or it's going to happen right now? Well, 1 verse 1. "Revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his bondservant the things that must shortly take place." Things that must shortly take place. Revelation chapter 22, verse 7. "Behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is he who heeds the prophecy of this book." Verse 10, "And he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near." Verse 12, "Behold, I am coming quickly." Verse 20, "He who testifies to these things says, yes, I am coming quickly." You see, everything here says, time is at hand, it's near, I'm coming quickly. Now, if that means anything, it means these events were going to be fulfilled right away. And to say it's going to be fulfilled 2,000 years later or 8,000 years later throws us into a tremendous problem with respect to interpreting the Bible. Because if near at hand doesn't mean near at hand, then what does it mean? It's not a matter of taking the Bible literally, because after all, this book is written in symbols, but it's a matter of just taking it realistically, commonsensically. If it's near at hand, it's near at hand. Now, is there a bunch of stuff in the New Testament about a near-at-hand event? Yes, there is. There's all kinds of stuff about the near-at-hand destruction of Jerusalem. That is the event that's spoken of repeatedly as being near at hand. Now, let's look back at Matthew 23 and 24, and let's look at this a little bit more, and we'll see this. This is the near event that's all over the New Testament. We won't even begin to look at all the passages that show this, just enough to where I hope that you'll be open to the way I'll be approaching the book. Matthew 23, 34 to 38. This is at the end of these 8 woes in Matthew 23. Okay? "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you shut up the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, because you shut up the kingdom of heaven." These 8 woes here in chapter 23 match the 8 Beatitudes in chapter 5. So, in Luke, you've got blessed are you and woe to you right next to each other. In Matthew, you've got your 8 Beatitudes at the beginning of the book, and you've got your 8 woes here in chapter 23, and they match up. You can lay them right out, and they correspond to one another. And when he's done with these woes to the Pharisees, You may remember that there are three big woes in Revelation. He says this in verse 34, "Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city." Now, when does this take place? Well, it can't be the sending forth of the 70 and the sending forth of the 12, because that's already happened. I mean, Jesus is just about to go to the cross. So this has to be referring to after Pentecost, but they're being sent to Israel. They're going to be scourged in synagogues, killed and crucified, persecuted from city to city. This has to be talking about something that happens after Pentecost, but before the destruction of Jerusalem. The period of the book of Acts. Now this is important because the book of Revelation shows us 144,000 saints, and then it shows them being persecuted and killed. And this is the same thing here. He says, let's just paraphrase this, the Holy Spirit is going to come in about 2 months, and I'm going to send you prophets and wise men and scribes, and over the next 40 years you're going to be killing them and crucifying them, and you will scourge them in your synagogues and persecute from city to city. Now, it's true that the wicked continue to do this, okay, right down to the present day. Was it in Afghanistan or Saudi Arabia or somewhere a man was killed for converting to Christianity about 2 months ago? But this specifically is talking about what the Jews will do. Then he says that on you scribes and Pharisees, you Jews, on you, guys I'm talking to right now, may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zachariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things shall come upon this generation. Now there is no way to take that other than in a commonsensical way. You can't say this generation is the generation of the fig tree that starts in 1948 or something. There's no way you can get that out of this. That's very Procrustean. You know what the bed of Procrustes is? Procrustes had this bed, and when travelers would come to visit, he would welcome them into his house, and he'd say, "You can sleep in my bed." And if they were too tall or long for the bed, he'd chop their legs off to make them fit the bed. And if they were too short to fit the bed, he would stretch them out to make them fit the bed. And so we speak of a bed of Procrustes, or a Procrustean argument, as one that's forced and stretched and butchered in order to make it fit. Well, to read this and say, well, this generation means something that starts in 1948 is just Procrustean. There is no way you can get this out of that. Jesus is talking to these scribes and Pharisees, and he tells them that all the blood shed on the earth of all martyrs, of all the prophets killed from Abel, and we know Abel was a prophet because it says that Cain spoke with his brother Abel and then killed him. So that's enough right there to show you Abel is a prophet. Down to Zachariah, the son of Berechiah, and that's a reference to the last martyr in the book of Chronicles, and in the Hebrew Bible, Chronicles is the last book. In our Old Testament, Malachi is at the end, but in the Hebrew Bible, Chronicles is the last book. And so from A to Z, textually, from Abel to Zechariah, except in the Hebrew alphabet, Z is not the end, but at any rate, from the first martyr to the last martyr in the Old Testament, all of their blood is going to be put on you, guys I'm talking to right now, you Jews. And, he says, what is going to fill it up is that you're going to murder the Christian witnesses that I send forth over the next 40 years. And that's going to fill it up. Remember, the iniquity of the Canaanites was not yet filled up, so Abraham wasn't given the land. When their iniquity was filled up, God brought the children of Israel in and conquered the Canaanites. Same thing here. He says, your iniquity has been filling up, and when you murder the Christian witnesses over the next 40 years, scourging them in your synagogues, killing them and crucifying them, like James, the bishop of Jerusalem, is murdered right at the beginning of the AD 60s, and others, that will fill it up. Now, what were you going to say?
So a generation is 40 years?
Yeah, a generation could be 30 or 40 years, but this generation. Now, let me just remind you of what happened in the book of Revelation. Revelation chapter 6, Verse 9, when he broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God, and because of the testimony that they had maintained, and they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, wilt thou refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told they should rest a little while longer until the full number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even they has been, should be completed also. So who are these saints under the altar who are crying out for vengeance? Remember, blood spilled out on the land cries for vengeance. No. These are the guys who were told to wait until their full number has been filled up. These are already killed. These are all the guys from Abel to Zechariah. Okay? All the Old Testament. Now it says, you wait just a little while, not 2,000 years, just a little while longer, until the full number has been killed. Now, chapter 7, immediately we have the sealing of the 144,000 Jewish witnesses. And in chapter 14, we find the Lamb on Mount Zion with 144,000 Jewish witnesses. And then it says in verse 13, Blessed are those who die in the Lord from now on. And then the angel reaps the wheat harvest, and the angel reaps the grape harvest, and the blood flows out all over the land. And then we see the 144,000 in heaven having come off victorious. So who is it that's martyred here? It's 144,000. And what does that do? It fills up the complete number of those who are going to be murdered. And then the bowls are filled with their blood, and they're poured out on Babylon, and Babylon is destroyed. Do you see? So what Jesus says here is the same thing. He says, all the blood that cries out for vengeance from Abel to Zechariah, and then added to that are those that you will kill and crucify, and all of that blood is going to be required of this generation. The book of Revelation, the Old Testament saints are under the altar crying for vengeance. They're told to wait a while. 144,000 Christian witnesses are set aside. Those Christians are martyred, and that's it. That fills it up, and then Babylon is destroyed. You see? You follow it? You got it? Do I have to do this again?
Thinkest thou that number, 144,000, an actual number?
No, because the book of Revelation is written in symbols. So, that is just a rule. I mean, there are parts of the Bible that aren't, but when you get to Revelation, if there's a choice between literal and symbolic, you ought to lean to the symbolic. Like in chapter 18, when Babylon falls and we have the merchants lamenting, and it talks about how, oh, this city, we had so much trade and traffic. Sometimes people will fall back into saying, well, I guess Jerusalem was a big trade center. No, you need to kind of say, no, wait a minute, this is still symbolic. And the trade and traffic that's being spoken of here actually means something else. And, we'll get to it. And we always say literal wherever possible, and Revelation is kind of symbolic wherever possible. But anyway, I want you to see this, okay? This is a near event. This will come upon this generation. Back here in Matthew 23. We'll continue in Matthew 23, verse 37. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. That's the focus of this prophecy. Who kills the prophets and stones those who were sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is left to you desolate. And you want to talk about the abomination of desolation? This is it. Jerusalem's house, which is what? What is the house in Jerusalem? The temple. Your house, the temple, is left to you desolate. And I say to you, you will not see me until you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Jesus came out of the temple and was going away. That's the desolation of the house, right there. When Jesus leaves it, it's empty, man. It's kind of a greater desolation to come, but this is the essential one. And the disciples came up to point the temple buildings to him. And he answered and said, Do you not see all these things? Truly I say to you, not one stone here will be left on another that will not be torn down. And then we have this whole discourse here, much of which has to do with the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the whole point of what Jesus is doing. And we could look at it. I don't want to go through all this. He says there's going to be this great tribulation, the Jewish-Roman war. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. There's no reason to pop this off into the future, folks. This is describing what took place down to the year AD 70. And look at verse 34 then. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Now my margin says this race will not pass away. That's not possible. The word genea never, ever means race. It means a generation. The reason that some people will take it as race is because they're convinced that this has to be talking about some event that's future, but it just isn't. It isn't. Or they'll say it has a double reference, that they refer to the destruction of Jerusalem and also the second coming. Well, that's a possibility theologically, but the immediate prophecies here concern that generation. A simple sense. Now look at Luke 24, this event that's near at hand. The book of Revelation says this big event is near at hand. Well, New Testament talks about the event that's near at hand. Luke 21, verses 20 to 24. Jesus is the same sermon, only Luke gives it in different words. You realize that Jesus sat on the Mount of Olives and probably talked to the disciples for 2 or 3 hours, and we get kind of a condensed version in Matthew, and we get a condensed version in Luke, and the fact that there's different phrasing, Jesus may have said all these things. Luke 21, verse 20. When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies and recognize her desolation is at hand. So the city is going to be desolated too, not just the house. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of the city depart. Let not those who are in the country enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, in order that all that has been written may be fulfilled. Vengeance in the Bible is always a response to what? What calls for vengeance? Blood. Blood on the land. The blood of Abel cries out for vengeance. The blood of Jesus cries out for better things than the blood of Abel. Jesus says to the Pharisees, the blood of all the prophets from Abel to Zechariah, plus all the New Testament prophets that you're going to kill, all their blood will call for vengeance. Luke, Jesus says, these are days of vengeance. Back behind that is the blood. The Nile turns to blood, and the angel of death is called up to avenge that blood. Where did all that blood in the Nile come from? It came from all the boy babies who'd been killed 80 years earlier. And God just waited 80 years. Then He turned the Nile to blood and called up the avenger, the angel of death, and the angel of death went through the house and killed the firstborn of every home. Now it's going to happen to Jerusalem. All the bloodshed from Abel to Zechariah, plus those they kill, like Stephen and James the apostle, who was killed by Herod, and all the rest. That blood will call for vengeance. These are days of vengeance, in order that all that which is written may be fulfilled. Woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. What people? People in the future? No. Those people. They will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Verse 32. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all things take place. That's what it's talking about. This event. It's a big event. Now, we'll have to discuss the theology of this more as we go, but the reason it's such a big event is that the destruction of Jerusalem ends the entire first creation. If you'll think back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2, you'll remember that when God made the world, He sets up the land of Eden, and He sets up a garden on the east side of Eden with 2 trees. And in the old creation, there is always one central sanctuary on the earth. And later on, this becomes the tabernacle, which is the only place, the central sanctuary where God is enthroned. And then it becomes the temple, which is the navel of the world, according to Ezekiel. Isn't it Ezekiel? Maybe it's Jeremiah. It's the center of the world. It's the place where God is enthroned. And that becomes Jerusalem, which is the center of the world where God is enthroned on earth. That's the old creation. Do we still have that today? No. Wherever two or three are gathered, that's the new creation. The Holy Spirit comes, and it's not that there's no center in the kingdom, but that every place is a center. We're a center, and it starts here, and down the street there at Trinity, they're a center, and it starts with them. And at First Press, they're a center, and it starts with them. It's multi-centralized. Now, the destruction of Jerusalem is the end of this entire creation. From Abel, see? It's not just the end of the Davidic covenant when the temple was made the first time. It's not just the end of the Mosaic covenant when the law is given. It's not just the end of the Abrahamic covenant when the Jews were set aside. It's the end of the whole old creation from Abel forward with this principle of a central sanctuary. Now that's why so much attention is given to the destruction of Jerusalem in the New Testament. It's the end of the whole first world. The new world starts in AD 30, and the old world continues and overlaps and is ended in AD 70. During this time, people convert out of the old world into the new. And the church is formed, and the New Testament is written, and when that's all finished and ready to go, then God wipes out the old creation. Do you see this? That's why it says blood from Abel forward. Not blood from Moses forward or blood from Abraham forward. Blood from all the way back to the beginning. So that the old creation ends and we have a new heavens and earth. What makes the heavens new? There is a man seated at the right hand of God for the first time. What makes the earth new? Guess. What changes in heaven is that Jesus ascends and sits at the right hand of the Father, and now we have a man in heaven. What changes on the earth? Pentecost. The Holy Spirit comes into the earth in a new way. Jesus goes up, the Spirit comes down. New heaven, new earth. Now that's the big change. You see, sometimes people say, gee, why is the destruction of Jerusalem such a big deal in the New Testament? Well, this is why. Because it's the end of the whole world. Okay? The temple was built by Solomon in the year 930 BC. And exactly 1,000 years later it was destroyed. The world was made in the year 3930 BC, and exactly 4,000 years after the old creation was made, the old creation is eliminated. You have to get all the biblical chronology newsletters and read it and add up the numbers yourself to see if I'm right. And I certainly didn't start off believing that, but that emerged from the study, and I've come to accept it, that there are 4,000 years history to this old creation, from the garden to the destruction of Jerusalem. Works out. I didn't write those numbers in the book. They're just there. This is important. The book of Hebrews talks about this coming destruction, something that's near at hand. And this is written to Jews. Of course, Paul refers to these near events, this wrath that's coming upon the whole world very soon, and all this. That type of phrasing's in Paul too. But Hebrews 10:25, a verse you're familiar with. Not forsaking the assembling together, as is the custom of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. As you see the day drawing near. It's written to Hebrews. There's something drawing near that they can see. And of course, Jesus gives them all kinds of signs and prophecies concerning the destruction of Jerusalem so that they would know. They would be able to tell when it's drawing near. That's what's spoken of here. Not the second coming, but this near event. Hebrews 13, verse 13 to 14. Hence let us go out to him outside the camp, bearing his reproach. For here we do not have a lasting city, but we're seeking the city that is to come. Now, spiritually speaking, that applies to every generation. We should always leave behind the old world and come more fully into the kingdom of God. But this is very specific here to them. He's saying, don't hesitate to leave behind the old city. He says, after all, the New Jerusalem has already come. Do you know that? It says in Hebrews chapter 12, you have come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. It's already here. The New Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, is already here in Hebrews 12. It's not just off in the future. It's already now. So the near event everywhere in the New Testament is the destruction of Jerusalem. The day is near here in Revelation. What kind of near event? We look at Revelation, we see the city being destroyed and all this stuff. Well, it's awfully tempting to link it up with this near event that's everywhere else. Well, can we do so? Yeah, we can. Revelation shows us that at the time it was written, Jerusalem is still standing. And this is the proof to me that Revelation was written before AD 70. Not only the fact that it links up, obviously, with all these other prophecies, but the fact that Revelation 11 verse 8 tells us that the city is still there. It tells us about the two witnesses here in Revelation 11. Two olive trees, witness to God, and then they're murdered. Of course, we've already seen that those who bear witness during this period are going to be killed by the Jews and Judaizers, and the Romans and the Herodians as well, the beasts, but primarily we're looking at Jerusalem. It says in verse 8, "And their dead body will lie in the street of the great city, spiritually called Sodom and Egypt." What city is this? "Where also their Lord was crucified." Well, there's no doubt about that, you see. Now, this is a book of symbols, and so the one thing it's not going to say is the city Jerusalem. It won't say that. It'll say everything else. It'll say it's Sodom and Egypt and it's Babylon, but then it identifies it, where the Lord was crucified. Jerusalem is still there, you see. So, it only makes sense that we should see this as written earlier than the destruction of Jerusalem. Fourth line of evidence, D. We had our 6-week study of Babylon a while back. We saw that Babylon is always primarily a religious power in the Bible. A tower and a city. And the tower is the religious aspect, the city is the cultural aspect. The tower is what's most important. Here in Revelation 2 and 3, we have church in the city, Philadelphia. A church in the city, Smyrna. Church and the city. And we will also have the temple in Jerusalem. The tower in the city of Babel. The central aspect is the religious aspect. And in Zechariah chapter 5, verses 5 to 11, we saw the formation of Babylon as a counterfeit Jerusalem. We saw the woman in the ephah and the stork carrying the ephah. Remember, 2 storks? Remember we had in Zechariah 5. Review this. I know that y'all just live and eat and sleep and move and have your being in books like Zechariah. That's why you asked me to teach this stuff, I guess. Because it's my job too. But he says, lift up your eyes. And he says, this is the ephah going forth. And the lead cover was lifted up. And there's a woman inside the ephah. And he says, this is wickedness. He threw her down in the middle of the ephah and cast lead weight on her. And then storks came and they flew her off and he built a temple for her. Okay? Here's this ephah. And it has a lead lid. And it has these storks on either side of it that fly it. And there's this woman inside here. What is that? It's the counterfeit Ark of the Covenant. Instead of the law of God, we have wickedness inside. Instead of cherubim flying it around, we have storks flying it around. And it's taken to the land of Shinar, which is Babylon, and they put it on a throne and build a temple around it. Now that's the Babylon in the book of Revelation. Except that the woman has gotten out of here, and she's now sitting on the back of the beast. And the reason that the woman has gotten out of the ephah is because the Ark of the Covenant is opened up, so the mystery of the kingdom is published. And so the counterfeit Ark is also opened up so that the mystery of iniquity is published. You publish the mystery of the kingdom, immediately the mystery of iniquity is also published. This is the mystery of iniquity. The mystery of the kingdom is all the stuff that was locked up in the ark. It's opened up. Now the gifts are given forth. The mystery of iniquity is what's locked up in this ephah, in this counterfeit temple. It's opened up. And the woman is now sitting on the back of the beast, drunk with the blood of the saints. But you see, what Zechariah is saying is not that a bunch of Jews left Jerusalem and trucked over to Babylon and built a fake temple. That didn't happen. He's saying the spiritual separation is going on. Similarly, here, mystical Sodom and Egypt, mystical Babylon is Jerusalem. Well, therefore, Revelation was written before the Jewish-Roman War, which began in AD 66, and so it's written before AD 66. Now, what else? Well, if Babylon is Jerusalem, the sea beast is Rome, the beast that comes out of the sea. We will see that the sea has to do with the Gentiles and the land has to do with Israel. Land is Israel, sea is Gentile. We have a sea beast and a land beast, and the sea beast is Rome. And it's described here, the beast that comes from the abyss. Verse 10, they are 7 heads. So 7 horns are 7 heads. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and another has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little while. Okay, we'll do more with this when we get there, but the 5 that have fallen are Julius Caesar, Octavian or Augustus Caesar, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius. Okay, that's the 5. Then Nero, Gaius Nero, is on the throne now, and he's going to die in AD 68, and then Vespasian, who is actually called away from sacking Jerusalem, comes and rules for a very short time before AD 70. Then he rules on after it, but this history only goes to AD 70. Nero is on the throne. Moreover, chapter 13, verse 18, here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is also that of a man. Now, the primary meaning of the number of the beast is not that it refers to Nero, but that it refers to Solomon, who is taking in 666 talents of gold every year after he falls into sin. And there are other Old Testament references that show us the meaning of beastishness. But it's also the number of a particular man. And that works out to be Nero Caesar. And we'll look at that when we get there. So, again, we can pinpoint the date of this by saying it's written before Jerusalem, before the Jewish-Roman War, during the reign of Nero. Nero became emperor in AD 54. He began his persecutions in AD 64. The letters to the 7 churches look as if the persecutions are already starting up. So usually the book is dated around AD 64 after Nero begins his persecutions. Nero was a pretty good ruler for the first 7 or 8 years of his reign, and then he went insane. And after he went insane, and they don't know why, maybe too much lead in the aqueducts or something, but he went nuts, just bananas. And that's when all this started. We might say he became demon-possessed and just leave it at that. That God sent these demons, and we see in the book of Revelation, God sending demons forth to cause tribulation. And maybe that's exactly what happened. But he went from being an okay emperor to being cruel and horrible. So maybe the book was written about that time. If John was in exile at Patmos, which we don't know for sure, if the persecutions have already started up, then it would be written around AD 64. If not, maybe it was written in 60 or 58 or something like that. Well, what's the audience of this book? That's the date. That's what I'm going to be going with. The audience, this book is not written to the people in Jerusalem. It's not written to Jews. It's written to the 7 churches in Asia Minor. And that's important, because the destruction of Jerusalem and the stuff about the beast and all that is an object lesson to these churches. And that's how the book continues to have perennial value. What he says to the 7 churches is, I have a few things against you. I want you to shape up. If you don't shape up, I'm going to put your candle out. Then he writes to the next church, you're doing okay, but I got a few things against you, and you better be careful, because if you don't take care of these problems, I may have to come and take your candle out. Then he says, you want to see what I mean? And he shows them the destruction of Jerusalem. That's the Old Testament city set on a hill. That's the Old Testament lamp that's not under a bushel. That's the Old Testament church city lampstand complex. And he says they refuse to repent, and so the destruction of Jerusalem becomes an object lesson to these churches. So it's an object lesson to us. The fact that it's already in the past doesn't change its value for us. It's an object lesson to the church of all ages. It's an object lesson to these 7 churches, and it's an object lesson to us. See, that's the reason it's important to notice the audience. It says here in chapter 1, verse 4, John to the 7 churches that are in Asia. It doesn't say John to the Jews in Jerusalem. Watch out, your time's almost up. No, it's to the 7 churches, and the destruction of Jerusalem is a revelation to them of how God acts in the church. So this book, even though the historical events take us down to AD 70, is revealing the principles that God is going to use throughout the New Testament age. The principle is Babylon gets destroyed and the New Jerusalem is built out of the spoils. The principle is the beast will attack, but the beast will be judged. And so whether you're living in the year 1000 or the year 1450 or the year 1994 or the year 3968, it's still written to you because you're in the 7 churches. And the meaning is the same. Everybody understand that? That's how it gets relevant to us. People, kind of instinctively feel, well, gee, if this whole book is about things that happened in the AD 60s, then what good is it for us? Well, it's the same good as the book of Isaiah and Jeremiah, which largely predicted things that have already come to pass, you see. It's the same value as the Gospels that describe things that have already happened a long time ago. And particularly, the whole point of the book is that it is addressed to us to show us how God acts. Okay, I want real quickly to do the next page in your notes. It looks like I have 1 minute left, and we can really do this in about 1 minute. I had thought maybe we could take more time with it, but we've already discussed it. Approaches to Revelation's prophecies. The futurist approach says almost everything in the book concerns the second coming, and it's all in the future. Usually those people think the world's coming to an end right now, so we can start seeing these prophecies being fulfilled right now. That's kind of short-sighted. And the main problem is the book says it's near at hand. So the futurists always wind up with this problem that it's kind of obvious that all these New Testament predictions were fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, and then they have to have Jerusalem rebuilt and another destruction of Jerusalem in the future where everything happens again. And that's dyslexic approach to the prophecies. There's no need for that. The second approach, which you don't have too much anymore, is the historical approach that sees the book of Revelation kind of predicting generation by generation, century by century, the events in Western history. So you get down to Babylon, that's the Roman Catholic Church, and the beast is the Turks, and then different popes and different medieval kings, and the Protestant Reformation is in here and all the rest. The problem with that is it's very culturally chauvinistic. Who are we to say that our history is the main history? Who are we to say that Jesus is only concerned with white Northern Europeans? And the world's coming to an end now. The gospel's never going to really go and impact Latin America and Africa and Asia. All God really wanted was to save the Jews in the Old Testament and to save the white Aryans in the New Testament and forget all those colored people around the rest of the world. He's not going to do anything with them. I think that there's kind of no one really means to be racist or culturally chauvinist when they take this view, but I think unconsciously it's there. All that really matters is our history. And we don't really have any vision that maybe the kingdom's going to keep right on going, and there are going to be great churches in Paraguay and great theological seminaries in Nigeria and Mongolia. There are going to be a great spaceport there, taking people to colonize the planets, Christians out all over. All of this might happen. Who knows? Why should we think that history ends with us? And yet people continually do this. All of us have kind of grown up thinking that, and I think most of us have worked our way out of there. The historical approach then doesn't commend itself to me. You have to assume that you're living at the end, and that way you can go through the book and sort everything out. The thematic approach is quite good. The thematic approach just says, well, this book is dealing with various themes of how God acts, and it's good for all time, and that's true. But it doesn't contradict the preterist approach, which says it mainly concerns the destruction of Jerusalem, and then it reveals these things. Now, there's two kinds of preterist approaches real quick. One is what I call the ancient newspaper or Josephus approach, which goes through the book and tries to pinpoint all these symbols in terms of the Jewish-Roman War. This army here is the army of Gallius Festus. This army here is the army of Vespasian. And this event here corresponds with this thing in Josephus. I don't think that works. I'm going to use a more biblical theological approach and talk about the general spiritual warfare between the saints and the wicked at this time in history. There will be a few things about the Jewish-Roman War, but I don't think there's that much specifically about it in Revelation. Finally, because Revelation is written to the churches, it's always applicable. And that's the point we've already made. So that's how I'll be approaching the book, and as we go, we can maybe discuss these things more, but I wanted to lay all that out so next week we can plow into the text. Let's close in prayer.
Father in heaven, thank you for the Scriptures. Thank you for their encouragement to us. We ask your blessing now as we go to worship you. If we pray in Christ's name, amen.